African countries got independence, or supposedly they did, but former colonizers do not get it. Do not get it that when Africa got independence and African countries were declared independent states, they are supposed to operate like independent entities, free of interference, free of outside noise, free of outside decisions, global pressures, and all that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, that's not how it works. Despite the fact that many Africans have gotten their independence, purportedly, many of these countries are still under the chokehold of their former colonizers. Do not get me started on Francophone, but today we are going to talk about British and the influence that they have, or the kind of pressure that they exert on African countries in a bid to keep them controlled and subdued, as if we are still in that colonizer and colony relationship.
This country is no longer the colony of Britain. If the ANC gave them that impression, they must know their friend ANC is going away. We are not going to belong to any structure of Britain, including Commonwealth. We are going to withdraw from Commonwealth because there is nothing common about the Commonwealth except that we're all the subjects of Britain. We don't want to belong to anything that has got to do with Britain. Britain needs us. We don't need Britain.
Hi guys, how you doing? Welcome to another episode of these chat sessions. My name is Indira Ganga. I am a business journalist by profession, and I love coming on here and just having a conversation with you guys on Black people, Black empowerment, the place of Africa, and how we can rise up and take our space at the global stage, and also just rise up to the occasion and speak with one voice and one accord as Black people. Today, I want to talk about something very interesting that I bumped into online. And we've always spoken about France and the influence that it tries and continues to try having on the continent, right? And if you know a thing or two about France, you know that it's a country that has refused to allow African countries to operate independently. It continues to meddle, it continues to manipulate, and it continues to just exploit its former colonies. And unfortunately, France is not the only country doing that. Britain is also very guilty of doing that. The robberies that they've committed on the continent is a conversation for another day. But just the sheer arrogance to blatantly refuse to allow African countries to operate as African countries and independent of British influence is baffling. And maybe some of it is because we are still stuck with imposter syndrome, and what the white man brought is what many Anglophone countries think is the gospel truth. But also some of it is because, is there an alternative, right? Some of it is just pure meddling, and we'll get to the meddling part. But I find it very curious, and Julius Malema also speaks about it, and we'll listen to him very briefly talk about it. There's certain traditions and practices that we continue to carry with us that were introduced to the continent by the white man, by the British. Why do we keep upholding these things 50, 60 years later, depending on when the country got independence? Why are we still upholding British practices? Why are we still living as if we are under British influence? Some of those things that they brought here, it looks cultured, but it was introduced to us by blatant force, brutality. It was bitten into us, indoctrinated into us. It does not necessarily make it right. It means that it was instilled in us through fear. So why haven't we as Africans gotten to a place where we are interrogating some of these things? And this is exactly what Julius Malema asks. For example, why are lawyers still adorned in British regalia? Why? Well, guys, Julius is a very spirited and fierce leader. Tell me what you think about his speech, what you think about his thoughts. Do you think that it's fair to ask a country like South Africa to just shut down its coal mines and move on as if nothing ever happened? Then what happens to its electricity production? Are you skeptical as Julius when it comes to visits by the West on the continent? Or are you one of those people who believes that it's a good thing that the continent is beginning to open up and Western leaders are beginning to come to the continent and warm up to the continent? A lot to be said about how we live our life and even just how we communicate. Forget even the dressing code and the culture and how we carry ourselves, just the way Julius has spoken about. There's a lot also to be discussed in terms of how we communicate. For example, language. English is not an African language. English was brought to us. English came, there's a joke in Swahili, we say, English came by the sea on a ship. And so it's not our language. And because of colonization and mapping of different countries, Francophone, Anglophone, either the uniting language is French, or the uniting language is Arabic, or the uniting language is English. And we don't have an African language that we've just decided this is the language as Africans that we're going to speak. We still use the colonizers' language as a uniting factor. Yes, Africans have different sub-tribes and different languages that they use in their countries, but if you put an Anglophone country and a Francophone country together, if the Francophone do not speak English, they can't communicate. If the Anglophone does not speak French, they can't communicate. But these two languages are not indigenous African languages. They really are not. So even in communication, we don't have what is ours. We're still using things that were passed down to us by colonizers.
Must have a language that unites Africans, like Swahili. If Swahili can be developed and it become a continental language, and then we do away with speaking to each other in English, because that's what colonizers did, divided us, made sure that we don't have a common language to communicate amongst ourselves, and then we use their language to communicate so that they can hear everything.
Part of that imposter syndrome is the fact that we've put colonizers on such a high pedestal, and part of it is because of the atrocities that they committed on the continent and all the thuggery and the robbery that happened, and it gave them a head start. But we tend to overlook our fellow brothers. We tend to overlook our fellow Black people. For example, I have lived in Ghana, and Black Americans are coming back to the continent a lot more. I don't understand why we can't look to Black Americans as our next partners. I don't understand why we can't look at Nigerians, we can't look at Ugandans, South Africa as our partners. We're always like, yeah, I want a French partner, I want a British partner, I want, we've over-exalted the West, and we think that we've given them the status of the Messiah. It's either them or nobody in terms of business, in terms of development, in terms of partnership, in terms of strategy. It's something that happens in Kenya a lot. Like if you have a company and you've partnered with a white person, you're going to be favored in so many places because this white person might not even be doing anything. They might just be like a talking head or a figurehead, but because we've over-exalted Western people and Western principles, we've reduced the influence and the impact that our very own people can have in our life. And therefore, we've sort of slowed down our development because we are at the mercy of the West.
Our going to London, talking to business people in London, talking to business people in America, everywhere else, is not talking to imperialism. It's talking to individual potential investors. The same thing we can do in Nigeria. The same thing we can do in Kenya. We need a borderless continent. We need a continent with one currency. We need a continent with one parliament, which has got teeth and it will bite and hold the executives in countries accountable.
Because we've given the West so much power, the West have taken that power and they've run with it. But unfortunately, even for them, they have overestimated their place on the continent. Because tell me, why were Western countries telling Kenya when it was going for elections in 2013 that choices have consequences? Kenyans have every single right to put into office whoever it is that they want. And you might say that, yeah, they were right by saying choices have consequences. The leader that you put in office reflects a lot in terms of development, in terms of governance, in terms of democracy. That is true, but also we know that the West does not do anything out of the goodness of their heart. There's always an agenda. And isn't it the same West that put Donald Trump in office? Isn't it the same West that put Biden in office? Isn't it the same West that has President Macron in office and the French people are out there demonstrating about how hard life is and freedom and labor rights? Aren't these the same people that are trying to lecture Africa on democracy, on how to live their life, on how to govern their people, on how to do business? And it's the sheer audacity of the British Parliament to sit down and discuss South Africa and South Africa's business without South Africans in the picture. I mean, if that is not gossip and blatant disregard of the country, its people, and democracy, then what is it?
We get debated in British Parliament as if we are a British subject or province. ESCOM get discussed by the British Parliament on which direction ESCOM must take, because we are a colonial subject. This country is no longer the colony of Britain. If the ANC gave them that impression, they must know their friend ANC is going away. We are not going to belong to any structure of Britain, including Commonwealth. We are going to withdraw from Commonwealth because there is nothing common about the Commonwealth except that we're all the subjects of Britain. We don't want to belong to anything that has got to do with Britain. Britain needs us. We don't need Britain.
Well, guys, that's all we had for you today. Let me know what you think about this conversation. Do you think that it is time that African countries are just allowed to operate independently, and the institutions, the people, and the society is just respected and trusted to be able to do what is right for them? My name is Indira Ganga. I'll see you again next time.